So he called me up and said, I want to do a movie with a fight scene that everyone will remember called Return of the Dragon. He said, would you come over and do the fight scene with me? I said, well, do I have to lose? He says, yeah, you have to lose.
9 days before he died, he posted a video throwing punches in the Hawaiian sun. He was smiling, relaxed, almost playful, and beneath it he wrote, "I don't age, I level up." For decades, the world believed that line without hesitation. The internet turned him into a myth, the man who could never lose. The punchline of 1,000 jokes that all said the same thing in different ways. Chuck Norris doesn't fall. And then, on March 19th, 2026, everything went quiet. A short statement from his family. No dramatic farewell. No final scene. Just confirmation and silence. The kind of silence that feels heavier when it follows a life that loud. But the truth is, the legend was only ever half the story. Long before the memes, before the films, before the myth, there was a boy named Carlos Ray Norris growing up in rural Oklahoma. A place so small, it barely existed on the map. A place where opportunity didn't knock, it stayed away entirely. His childhood wasn't cinematic. It was heavy. His father drifted between jobs and struggled with alcoholism, bringing instability into a home that already had very little. What Carlos experienced wasn't explosive chaos. It was something quieter and, in many ways, harder. The kind of tension that lingers. The kind of fear that doesn't leave visible scars but shapes how a child sees himself. At school, he wasn't the strong kid. He wasn't the confident one. He was shy, withdrawn, unsure. The kind of kid who learns to stay unnoticed because attention doesn't feel safe. By his own account, he felt invisible. The one constant in his life was his mother, Wilma. Steady, grounded, deeply faithful. She held the family together when everything else was falling apart. And when the marriage finally collapsed, she made the decision that would quietly change everything. She left. Taking her sons with her, she moved first to Kansas, then eventually to California, chasing something better with no guarantee of finding it. For Carlos, that move didn't instantly transform his life, but it gave him something new. A chance, however small, to become someone else. Still, when he graduated high school, nothing about his future stood out. No accolades, no clear direction, just a quiet young man trying to figure out where he fit in a world that hadn't noticed him yet. So in 1958, he made a decision that would alter everything. He enlisted in the United States Air Force. It wasn't about glory. It wasn't about ambition. It was about structure, about escape, about finding something solid to stand on, and that decision took him thousands of miles away, to South Korea. There, in a place completely unfamiliar, something unexpected happened. He discovered martial arts. At first, it was just another activity, another way to pass time, but very quickly, it became something more. Because for the first time in his life, he found something that rewarded who he already was. Discipline, patience, persistence. He wasn't the loudest, he wasn't the fastest, but he kept showing up. And in that quiet repetition, something shifted. Confidence didn't arrive all at once. It built slowly, through effort. By the time he returned to the United States, he wasn't a different person on the surface. But internally, everything had changed. He had found direction. And for the first time, he knew exactly who he was becoming. He wasn't yet 30 years old, and already his life had taken a direction no one could have predicted. He had started with nothing. No connections, no money, no confidence to lean on. What he carried instead was something quieter, something harder to measure. Endurance. The boy who had once felt invisible was now stepping into a space where he could no longer be ignored. By the late 1960s, Chuck Norris wasn't just competing. He was winning. Not occasionally, not by chance, but consistently. He rose through the ranks of professional karate with a focus that bordered on obsession, learning from every loss, refining every weakness. And then something remarkable happened. He became the best. Not one of the best, not a contender. The best. He held the professional middleweight karate championship for 6 consecutive years. A level of dominance in a sport built on unpredictability that demanded attention. But even at that peak, something else was quietly unfolding, something that would change his life far beyond competition. That was when he met Bruce Lee. Their first encounters in the mid-1960s weren't about fame or film. They were about discipline, philosophy, and mutual respect. Both men saw something rare in each other, not just skill, but a deeper understanding of what martial arts meant beyond fighting. They trained together. They pushed each other. And when Bruce Lee began casting for The Way of the Dragon in 1972, he didn't just want an actor. He wanted someone real, someone who could stand across from him and make the fight believable. He called Chuck Norris. The role wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the hero. It was the opponent, the final obstacle. A quiet, imposing figure whose presence alone created tension. But what unfolded inside Rome's Colosseum became something far bigger than a simple fight scene. It became history. For millions watching, it was their first time seeing Chuck Norris. The calm intensity, the controlled power, the stillness before movement. He didn't look like someone pretending to fight. He looked like someone who had lived it. At 32, with no formal acting background, no industry connections, and no clear path into Hollywood, he had just stepped into a world that rarely opened its doors to outsiders. And instead of waiting to be invited in, he built his way forward. The early years in film weren't glamorous. His first leading role came with Breaker. In 1977, a low-budget project that impressed critics and barely registered in Hollywood, Circles. But something else happened. Audiences noticed him. There was something different about his presence. He didn't perform toughness, he embodied it. The roles that followed didn't come with massive paychecks or critical acclaim, but they came steadily. Each film added another layer. Each role strengthened the image. He wasn't trying to become a star overnight. He was building something piece by piece, the same way he had built his martial arts career. And then came the turning point. Canon Films. In the early 1980s, the studio saw what others had overlooked. They understood that audiences weren't always looking for complexity. They were looking for certainty. A hero who didn't hesitate. A figure who stood firm when everything else fell apart. Chuck Norris fit that mold perfectly. Films like A Lone Wolf McQuade, Missing in Action, and Delta Force didn't aim to be subtle. They aimed to deliver exactly what audiences expected. And they did. By the mid-1980s, Chuck Norris wasn't just working in Hollywood. He was one of its defining action stars. Alongside names like Sylvester Stallone and Arnold Schwarzenegger, he occupied a space that felt larger than the films themselves. But unlike them, he never leaned into humor or spectacle. He stayed grounded, serious, unshaken. Critics called it limited. Audiences called it real. And for a time, that was enough to carry him to the top, until the industry began to change and the tide slowly started to turn. By the early 1990s, the landscape of Hollywood was shifting. The era that had once elevated straightforward action heroes was evolving into something more complex, more effects-driven, and more dependent on spectacle than presence. For many actors of his generation, that shift marked a decline. For Chuck Norris, it became a pivot. He didn't fight the change, he moved through it. Instead of chasing the shrinking opportunities in film, he stepped into television, a medium that, at the time, many film actors still saw as a step down. But what Norris understood, perhaps instinctively, was that television offered something films no longer could: consistency, connection, longevity. Walker, Texas Ranger premiered in April 1993. From the beginning, it was clear what the show intended to be. It wasn't trying to compete with critically acclaimed dramas or redefined storytelling. It didn't need complexity to succeed. At its core, it was built around a simple idea: a good man standing firm in a world that refused to be simple. Norris played Cordell Walker, a modern Texas Ranger with a strong moral code and an unshakable sense of justice. The character didn't bend. He didn't question his purpose. He acted, and that clarity resonated. Every Saturday night, millions of viewers tuned in. Families watched together, parents, children, grandparents, all drawn to a show that didn't require interpretation. It offered something rare even then: certainty. Right and wrong were clear. And Walker stood in the middle of that line. The show ran for 8 seasons, spanning 203 episodes from 1993 to 2001. Over that time, Cordell Walker became more than a character. He became familiar, reliable, a presence in American homes that felt almost personal. But Norris wasn't just acting, he was building. As both the lead and a producer, he shaped the direction of the show. Its tone, its values, its boundaries, those were his decisions as much as anyone's. That level of control meant something important. It meant ownership. By the later seasons, he was earning around $375,000 per episode, placing him among the highest-paid television actors of that era. But the real value of Walker, Texas Ranger, didn't stop when filming ended. It expanded. Through syndication, international distribution, and later streaming, the show continued generating revenue long after its original run. Over time, it brought in hundreds of millions of dollars. And because Norris had secured a share of the profits through his production company, he remained tied to its success in a way many actors never are. But that connection eventually led to conflict. Years after the show ended, Norris filed a lawsuit against CBS, alleging that distribution deals had been structured in a way that prevented him from receiving the full share he was contractually owed. It wasn't a small claim. It was complex, technical, and required patience to pursue. The case lasted years, and in 2023 it ended in a settlement. The details were never fully disclosed, but the outcome spoke clearly enough. Once again, Norris had done what he had always done. He stayed in the fight long enough to reach resolution. By the time Walker Texas Ranger faded from its original run, Chuck Norris had built something few could replicate. Not just a career, a system. He was no longer just a martial artist or an actor. He was a brand, a businessman, a producer, and, for many, a symbol of something steady in a changing world. Discipline, faith, persistence, ideas that, through him, felt tangible rather than theoretical. And then, something unexpected happened. The internet arrived and turned him into something even bigger than he had ever been on screen. The legend of Chuck Norris didn't just grow, it transformed. But what came next in his life wasn't about expansion. It was about endurance in a way no audience could see coming. The settlement with CBS closed quietly, but it carried a clear implication. Chuck Norris had not miscalculated. He had understood the value of what he built, and he had protected it. That instinct defined the next phase of his life. Unlike many actors of his generation, Norris didn't rely solely on film salaries or television contracts. He understood something deeper, that a name, if managed carefully, could become a long-term business, and he built accordingly. With his wife Gina, he launched ventures that reflected not just opportunity, but identity. One of them was Seaforce Water, an artesian water company sourced from beneath their ranch in Texas. It wasn't positioned as a celebrity novelty. It was marketed around ideas that had always been tied to his image: purity, discipline, and self-reliance. They followed that with Roundhouse Provisions, a brand focused on nutritional supplements and emergency preparedness. It spoke directly to the audience that had grown with him over decades, people who valued independence, health, and readiness. Another extension, Lone Wolf Ranch Pets, carried that same philosophy into pet nutrition. None of these ventures felt random. They were consistent. They reflected a man who didn't just build wealth, he structured it. His martial arts legacy continued to generate income as well. The United Fighting Arts Federation, which he founded, remained the backbone of a global network of schools. His books, endorsements, licensing deals, and decades of film and television royalties all contributed to a financial model built on diversification rather than dependence. By the time of his later years, his wealth wasn't explosive. It was stable, built steadily over time, without shortcuts, without collapse. But beyond business, there was something else that quietly expanded his presence in a completely different direction: the internet. In the mid-2000s, something unexpected happened. Chuck Norris became a phenomenon again, but this time not through films or television, through humor. Chuck Norris facts. Absurd, exaggerated, impossible statements that somehow captured the essence of how people saw him. They were ridiculous, but they carried a strange kind of respect. A recognition of the image he had built over decades, the man who never flinched, never hesitated, never appeared breakable. And instead of resisting it, he embraced it. With humor, with awareness without ego, that ability to adapt, to accept a new kind of relevance. kept him present in a culture that had moved far beyond the era that created him. Yet underneath all of it, there was something that mattered more to him than any business, any role, or any legacy: faith. It had been there from the beginning, rooted in his mother's influence, carried through hardship, strengthened through success and loss. It shaped how he viewed everything: family, discipline, purpose, and responsibility. And it led him to something that outlasted even his career: Kickstart Kids, a program he founded to bring martial arts training and character development to young people, many from difficult backgrounds. It wasn't about profit. It wasn't about recognition. It was about giving others the structure that had once changed his own life. By the time he reached his later years, the legend was already secured. The films, the shows, the business ventures, the internet myth, those were all visible. But the quieter truth was this: he had built everything he needed. And in the end, what remained wasn't the empire. It was what he chose to do with it. In the final years of his life, the world saw less of Chuck Norris, but what remained mattered more than visibility. Loss arrived quietly, but heavily. In 2024, his mother, Wilma, passed away at the age of 103. She had been there from the beginning, the constant presence in a childhood defined by instability. She was the one who believed before there was any reason to. Losing her wasn't just losing a parent, it was losing the foundation of everything he had built. Then, in December of 2025, Diane, his first wife, passed away as well. The woman who had stood beside him before the fame, before the championships, before the world knew his name. Their story had not been perfect, but it had been real. She had been part of the years when there was nothing to gain except the struggle itself. 2 losses close together, 2 people who knew him before. The legend existed. By the time Chuck Norris turned 86 on March 10, 2026, he was in Kauai, Hawaii. It had become a place of peace for him in later years, quiet, distant from the noise of the industry, grounded in a slower rhythm of life. He marked his birthday the way he always had, by moving forward. He posted a video, simple, direct, training in the sun, throwing punches with the same controlled precision he had practiced for decades. There was no performance in it, just familiarity, discipline, habit, and beneath it, a line that felt perfectly in character: "I don't age, I level up." People responded the way they always had, with warmth, admiration, and humor. The jokes returned, the memes resurfaced. The same myth that had followed him for years continued, almost instinctively. It felt like nothing had changed. 9 days later, everything did. On March 19, 2026, Chuck Norris suffered a sudden medical emergency in Kauai. There had been no long decline, no drawn-out warning. By all accounts, he had been active, present, himself just days before. The shift was immediate. He was taken to a local medical center. His family gathered quickly. The kind of gathering that doesn't follow a schedule, but urgency. The kind where everything else disappears and the only thing that matters is being there. And then, the next morning, the world was told. A brief statement, simple, direct, final. He had passed, surrounded by family. No detailed explanation, no extended narrative, just confirmation and a request for privacy. For a man whose life had been so visible, the ending was intentionally quiet. And maybe that was fitting. Because what Chuck Norris left behind didn't depend on how his story ended. It was already everywhere. His films still play. Walker, Texas Ranger still finds new audiences. The humor, the myths, the larger-than-life image, all of it continues, circulating in a way that doesn't require him to be present. But beyond all of that, there is something more lasting. A real story. A boy who started with nothing. A man who built everything through discipline. A life shaped not by perfection, but by persistence. By showing up again and again, even when there was no guarantee it would lead anywhere. He wasn't invincible, he was consistent. And that may be the more powerful legacy. Chuck Norris didn't just leave behind a career. He left behind proof that where you begin does not define where you end. And that kind of story doesn't fade, it stays.